Good evening, Life Groups. Today we're going to be continuing our series on how God speaks, and we're going to be speaking about the two primary ways He speaks. One through the written word, through His Bible, and this is common to all of us. We can all own a Bible, buy a Bible, read a Bible, and God speaks to us through this. The second way is through His Spirit and how He speaks to us individually, personally, about circumstances that we're facing or just wisdom in a situation. So I'm going to be reading a story from Acts chapter 3. It's really primarily about Peter, but John's there as well. And it's an amazing story, one of my favorite from Acts. It says this: Peter and John went to the temple one afternoon to take part in the 3 o'clock prayer service. As they approached the temple, a man lame from birth was being carried in. Each day he was put beside the temple gate, the one called the Beautiful Gate, so he could beg from the people going into the temple. When he saw Peter and John about to enter, he asked them for some money. Peter and John looked at him intently, and Peter said, "Look at us." The lame man looked at them eagerly, expecting some money. But Peter said, "I don't have any silver or gold for you, but I'll give you what I have. In the name of Jesus Christ the Nazarene, get up and walk." Then Peter took the lame man by the right hand and helped him up, and as he did, the man's feet and ankles were instantly healed and strengthened. He jumped up, stood on his feet, and began to walk. Then, walking, leaping, and praising God, he went into the temple with them. It's an amazing story about God's healing, and what's amazing is that these guys are just going about their normal business. They plan to go for a prayer meeting at the temple, and they see this guy that's lame, and now he had been there a whole bunch of times, but it says that they looked at him intently. I don't know what changed on this day. Maybe God highlighted the man to them, and that kind of how the Spirit speaks to us in that moment. But Peter gets this boldness to him. He gets this sense of authority and power, and he commands the man to stand up and walk. And the guy does that. And amazingly, the guy instantly gets healed. He starts walking around, praising God. It's an amazing miracle. And you can imagine for that guy who's been years and years and years crippled, how amazing this day must have been. And you wonder, how did Peter and John get there? You know, I remember so many times as a young believer, even now, I'm like, how does a believer get to that point where you act with that kind of authority? But it's found really in the experience of Jesus years earlier. And I'm going to read from Matthew chapter 10, verse 5 to 8. And Peter and John were with Jesus on this day, and they heard Jesus say this. It said, Jesus sent out the 12 apostles, and Peter and John were two of those 12, with these instructions: don't go to the Gentiles or the Samaritans, but only to the people of Israel, God's lost sheep. Go and announce to them that the kingdom of heaven is near. And then he tells them this: heal the sick, raise the dead, cure those with leprosy, and cast out demons. Give as freely as you have received. And so in many ways, what happened is that Jesus gave them a command, His word. And that's exactly what this is to us today. It's the commands of Jesus, the words of Jesus, His word. And so they were given that, and when they obeyed in Matthew, they saw all those things happening. They saw people get healed. They saw lepers get healed. They saw demons get cast out. They saw the dead raised. It's amazing because they were obedient to this, and then God led them in that purpose. And so what happens on this day when they were entering the temple is they knew the words of Jesus. And as they chose to be obedient to His word, God began to individually direct them and become a part of their story. So the word was here, commanding them what to do, and then the Spirit was leading them in response to their obedience to this. Back to the book of Acts. As you can imagine, this causes quite a stir, and crowds of people come rushing in and flooding them and standing all around them. And Peter sees the opportunity, and he goes this. Actually says, Peter saw his opportunity and addressed the crowd. That's the crowd that gathered. People of Israel, he said, why is it so surprising about this? And why stare at us as though we had made this man walk by our own power or godliness? For it is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of all our ancestors, who has brought glory to His servant Jesus by doing this. This is the same Jesus whom you handed over and rejected before Pilate, despite Pilate's decision to release Him. And Peter goes on and preaches an amazing sermon, and hundreds of people get saved that day. They give their lives to Jesus, and they become part of the church. And once again we go, how did Peter know what to say? Did Peter just say, hey, stop, give me 15 minutes, I'm going to go prepare a sermon? Or did he just carry a sermon in his back pocket in case someone gets healed? He had the healing one, he had if we multiply food, he had he had all these different sermons up his sleeve he could pull out. But the reality is that God gives him what to say in that moment. And we go, well, how did Peter know that God would do that. And again, we go to Matthew chapter 10, and this is exactly where we saw earlier, and I read from earlier with Jesus' instructions to his disciples. And he also gave these instructions in the same moment. When you are arrested, don't worry about how to respond or what to say. God will give you the right words at the right time. For it is not you who will be speaking, it will be the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. And so they had been given the word of Jesus again. And for us, the words of Jesus are contained in this book. And in response to, in obedience to the words of Jesus, I reckon Peter knew, man, if I'm not arrested, because Jesus' context was arrested. I'm not being arrested, but I'm in my point of need, and I've got an opportunity to preach the gospel. And in faith, he starts to preach, believing that God will just give him what he needs in the moment. Why? Because that's exactly what Jesus said he would do. And so there's this amazing interchange that happens, is that when we choose to be obedient to this, God starts speaking and coaching us in how to be obedient in that moment. And I think so often I meet believers who say, I've never heard God speak to me. And that's really not true. If you've ever read this is God speaking to you. And I think what happens is people will say, well, if God tells me to do something, I'll do it. If God tells me to serve in kids' church, I'll go serve in kids' church. If God tells me to lead a life group, I'll lead a life group. If God tells me to share Jesus with my friend, then I'll do it. But the reality is Jesus has already told us all those things. And we need to understand that just because we don't feel the Spirit moving in us in that moment doesn't mean God's not speaking. In this book are lots of instructions for us. It tells us that we can belong, and we need to belong to the local church, that we need to meet with those saints, that every single one of us have gifts, that we're called to serve in the local church. It tells us that we're called to share Jesus with people, to pray for people, to support the leaders of the church as they're building the church. There's a whole bunch of things that it tells us to do. And when you say, you know what, Jesus, I'm going to be obedient to your word, in that moment, God starts to direct you and say, hey, maybe not kids' church, maybe sound and tech, maybe not on the worship team right now, maybe you need to learn to serve just in a red team for a while. And God starts to direct. Why? Because you've already made the decision, I'm going to obey God and follow him. I'm going to obey this voice. And as we make that decision, he starts to speak to us here and give us individual leading and direction and all that kind of stuff. I've got to be honest with you, I don't think I heard God speaking to me personally for quite a while in my Christian faith. But what happened is that I just got this excitement to serve. I wanted to serve in youth. I was 16 then, serve in youth, serve in church, doesn't matter where, I just wanted to serve. And over time, as I started serving, God started leading and directing, opening opportunities for me and helping me get involved in just being in the right place and serving in the right area. And that's been my experience so often. When people choose to be obedient to this, they start to hear the Holy Spirit directing them as they act in obedience. So now you've got the opportunity to discuss this in your group and discuss your experience of this. And so there's a few questions you can discuss. You can talk about what are some things in the Word, in the Bible, that you know you can start being obedient to right now. You don't have to wait any longer. You know that's something that you see so clearly and you can get started. Maybe it's something for everyone in the group that you feel like, hey guys, maybe as a group we can get involved in this. And then maybe discuss this whole thing about, have you ever chosen to be obedient and then experience God's leading in that moment? Exactly what I'm speaking about. I'm going to be obedient to the word, and as you make that choice, God starts to lead and direct. Have fun discussing this stuff in life group. Guys, hearing the voice of God is the most exciting part of being a follower of Jesus. And for me, that doesn't matter if it comes from the word or if that comes from the Spirit in terms of an internal voice. I feel a prompting, I have a thought, I feel like God's leading me in some way. But hearing God and obeying is just such an exciting part of the Christian life. Enjoy life group tonight.